and welcome to Flip the Script Silver Bullet Central Episode 2, The Would Have Pitch. My name is Becc Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump into the content, if you do me a favor, go to flipthescript.co and make sure you download the deck so you can follow along at each step of the way. Once you've done that, I'm waiting. Just kidding. Let's jump into the content. So let's start with a bit of an agenda. I'll be brief here. There are going to be 4 parts. Number 1, what is it? Number 2, why would you use it? Number 3, when would you use it? And then we'll finish off with how you could use it. So let's start with what? The would have pitch is basically a pitch where your prospect already knows your company or who you are, and you deliver to them a pitch of what you would have pitched if they didn't know you. So why on earth would we do that? Number 1, if your outreach is super high quality, and I'm a big fan of personalized messaging, number 1, you're showcasing to your prospect your level of personalization that you would have pitched in case they didn't know you, so it raises the bar in their mind. So if you're personalizing your messaging, you're doing something that 99.9% of reps aren't doing. You know, most of the industry sees personalization as a buyer persona personalization or personalization down to the company level or personalization down to the technographic level. But very, very few people that I've seen in the industry go the extra step. They say, okay, I want to go into a psychographic personalization of I want to know David in specific, as opposed to who David works as the CEO of Drift, you know, where his company's at or where he's at in terms of buyer persona. So number 1, first and foremost, it gives your prospect basically it showcases that you would have personalized to them if you were prospecting into them cold. So you don't want to rob yourself of the opportunity to let your prospect know that your messaging would have been high quality if you were to prospect into them right off the bat. Number 2, it gives them a taste of your work. So a lot of our relationships, I've heard the quote that you can never undo a first impression, right? First impressions are very, very impactful. And so you want to lead to your prospect with, instead of, you know, hey, let's say you're using this competitor, you know, they're using your competitor of, hey, I want to talk about that. You want to give them right off the bat, instead of you're pushy and want to get in on something, that you want to start everything off on the right foot. So if you give them the would have pitch, you basically can showcase, you know, all of the detailed research you would have done. And so it conveys to them a first impression of, this person treated me well in the beginning, so they're probably going to treat me well within the sales cycle. So, you know, the honeymoon phase is coined because typically people are more impressive in the beginning than they are on the back end in who they typically are. And they kind of put on their sweatpants, so to speak. So number 2 is you want to give them a really great first impression so that they know your treatment to them is going to be very high quality throughout the sales cycle. Number 3, it shows them your typical behavior, and it's highlighting a strength if you're doing it correctly. So again, with personalized messaging, you know, it's something most people aren't doing. And so that's a strength of yours as prospecting now, as opposed to, you know, a detriment. So you want to show them and highlight to them a strong behavior of yours, so it conveys to that person that you have high character. And so even if they do close with you, that will continue on post-purchase. Number 4, and this is a competitive move, if they are we'll get into all the use cases that you can do this in a minute, but if they know you because they're using your competitor, if you reach out to them and you say like, hey, I want to talk about this article that you wrote where you wrote this one line and was really impressive, that is normally how I would prospect into you. It draws a comparison. It strikes a comparison in their mind of how are they prospected into by your competitor, and how are you prospecting into them now? So unless your competitor was reaching out to them with very tailored messaging that was very high quality, that came off in all the right manners, then this is going to be an advantage. So you are reaching in, again, typically people aren't doing that. So it draws in their mind some kind of delta and some kind of comparison of how was I prospected into originally by the person that I'm currently using, and is that different for the better or for the worse from the person who's prospecting into me now. So it gives them some kind of quality assurance metric to where they know that on the back end, again, if they were to move forward in the sales cycle, this is only for a competitive move. If they were to move forward in the sales cycle, if they were to try you out instead of the competitor, then they have reason to believe that it's going to be a more high quality experience overall because you prospected into them in a more high quality way. Number 5, it highlights that your prospect is knowledgeable. I typically ask people whenever we're doing sessions that are live, two questions. Number one, do you like asking for directions? So I'll pause for a second and I'll let you think about that. Typically, the answer is no. I don't like asking for the directions. The reason I don't like asking for directions is it puts me in an uneasy spot. I have to go up to someone I don't know. I have to look like I don't know something. I have to be in a place where I need something, where I need help from a stranger. And so psychologically, it's not very much fun to stop and ask for directions. Second question, do you like giving directions? Typically, the answer to that question is yes. I love giving directions. Someone comes up to me, I live in San Francisco, someone comes up to me and says, hey, do you know where Polk Street is? Even if I don't know where Polk Street is, I find myself digging in my phone and going through Google that they could have done to give them some kind of aid, because it puts me in a spot where I look very knowledgeable. I look, like I have some kind of information that can help them. And it puts me almost in a place of, I feel like a good person because I did my good deed for the day. So if you reach out to someone and you say, hey, I know that you already know who we are, given from what it seems like you're using this competitor. So I know you already know who we are. Typically I would go on this rant about the article that you wrote on LinkedIn where you talk about scaling effective teams, but X, Y, and Z. Right off the bat, you're highlighting to your prospect that they know something, which is really, really empowering for people. So knowledge is power, and the more times that you can convey to them that they have a piece of knowledge that typically people don't have, it makes them feel better. So, one last example, and then we can move on here. I want you to think through when people are at a conference, and let's say there's 1,000 people in the room, and the presenter asks a question and gets people to raise their hand. Usually people are very uneasy to do that, but sometimes they'll raise their hand thinking they have an answer. The reason that they're uneasy is because they're afraid that they're going to be wrong, and they're going to be wrong in front of 1,000 people. But the reason that some people do raise their hand is because the reward is that that they're right and they look super knowledgeable in front of 1,000 people. So the positive outweighs the negative. So they end up raising their hand in this conference and kind of rolling the dice, hoping that they're right, because the reward is so sweet that it outweighs the risk of them being wrong. So whenever you showcase that someone is knowledgeable, you really empower them, and you give them some kind of sense that they're in a spot that most people aren't, which helps you psychologically. So the sixth reason of why you would use it is it slips you into the lower hand, which is attractive to your prospect. So we like having authority in a room. And so when someone slips into basically a place where they are asking for help, they're looking to get mentored, they're asking you a question, it triggers in someone's mind that they have authority in the situation, which they really, really like. And so if you slip into the lower hand with someone in a situation, basically it pulls them in to make them want to do something. So I want you to think through, whenever you reach out to someone and they're super busy and you want to ask them a question about their work, how quickly they respond. So usually you're going to heighten the response because that person, suddenly all of a sudden you slipped into the advice chair, in the mentee chair. And so they want to be the quote unquote good guy or girl and step into the situation and help you. So whenever you're going into this pitch, and we'll get into the pitch in a minute, but basically when you're saying, like, I normally would have, said that you wrote this article on LinkedIn where you're talking about scaling effective teams. One line that stood out to me was blank, and have hooked it into what we do as a value prop. But considering you already know who we are, I'll just say this. It basically conveys to your prospect they're knowledgeable and you're the sleazy, kind of jokey sales rep that's coming into the room and basically looking for them to have grace on you of giving them the opportunity to convey their pitch. Number 7, one of the most important, is it allows you to go for the meeting right away. So a lot of times in outreach, if someone doesn't know who we are or doesn't know our product offering, there can be an education process. If they don't know who a conversation intelligence vendor is, or they don't know who a sales engagement vendor is like outreach, then typically you're going to have to go through some kind of process where you're educating them not only what your software is, but how it can hypothetically help them. So if someone is already using a competitor, or someone knows who your company is, or someone knows who you are in specific, It allows you to go for what you want more quickly because you can skip the educational phase, which usually shortens the sales cycle. And then the eighth reason why you would use it is its high conversion. So in my experience, it could just mean that be me and the teams that I've been working with, but it's going to cause your prospect to respond more than ever before because you're really tripling together a bunch of different psychological wins for your prospect. They're knowledgeable, you're the lower hand in coming in, and you're showcasing that you want to give some kind of really tailored experience to them in terms of the buyer journey. And so high conversion is what people are after. Like, let's make no mistake, we're in sales and we want to close more deals and we want to book more meetings as a leading indicator of that. And so high conversion is probably arguably the number one reason, but the other reasons lead into that conversion. So now we know why you would use it and what it is. So the next question we need to answer is, when would you use it? So I've put 5 different use cases here. Full disclosure, this is an exhaustive list, but these are 5 different use cases where someone would probably know what you do and who you are. So you could pitch to them what you would have said normally. So let's unpack them. Number 1, they're using a competitor. I think this is probably the most common one. So if they're using a competitor, you don't need to go on your dog and pony show on what a sales engagement vendor does, for instance. All you need to really do is tell them how you would have prospected into them in specific, and then pivot and ask for the meeting. And we'll go again into the text in a little bit. But the first case where they would always know who you were, most likely, is that they're using some kind of competitive product, so they probably know who you are. Number 2, they have a common relationship with someone. You know, whether that's an internal leader or they're a VC partner of yours, or you have some kind of connection, like on LinkedIn, or even better in real life. If they have a common relationship with, let's say, an internal leader, they probably know what that company is. So most of my friends, I only have 2, I know what their company does. I know what their company does and I know who their competitors are. And so this is a good way to know, like, okay, this person knows who my senior vice president of sales is. So they probably know what my product does. Number 3, social media suggests it. So they're either following your company on LinkedIn, they are liking or commenting stuff that your company is doing, or they have a mutual connection. But this can be a low-hanging fruit to know this person probably knows who we are if they're liking the posts of my company on LinkedIn. And so the would have pitch would be a good option. Number 4 is a late-stage competitive deal. You know, let's say that you catch wind, and this happens quite a bit in sales, you catch wind that they are evaluating your competitor very seriously, and maybe they're already in POC or trial. This is a good low-hanging fruit of, if they know who your competitor is and they are evaluating that competitor, this is actually arguably a great time to enter the deal. So most of the companies that I talk to, especially within B2B SaaS, they crave these conversations because they can't stand when they lose a deal, but they especially can't stand when they lose a deal to their competitor. And so this is a great place where you could give the would have pitch. And I actually, 3 marquee deals at my last company, we gave the would have pitch and we had 100% conversion and got to sell into the person. And so this is a great opportunity to do the would have pitch. And then the 5th one is they have engagement with your company. So I typically call these postbound leads. They're not an actual hand raiser, but they do know who you are. So a couple of examples here, content, downloads, webinar registrants or attendees, maybe they visited your booth at an event, but basically they know who your company is, but they didn't become a hand raiser. So that is a great example of when you could enter the scene and say, like, okay, I'm going to give them the would have pitch because they already know who I am, because they just read our article on top selling habits. But I need to do a little bit of digging and personalization, so I can convey to them that I want to deliver to them a very unique, tailored, and high quality experience. Now we know why we would use it, we know what it is, and we know when we would use it, but how do I use the would have pitch? How I do it is in 5 different steps. Number 1, I would set up the scenario. So basically, I would tell them the context of why you're giving them the would have pitch. So I gave an example here. Again, please download the deck so you can see it in more detail. But basically, reason for my outreach, candidly, is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that you're in market and seriously evaluating conversation intelligence. So I hope that you can pardon the unsolicited intrusion. So basically, you're telling them the scenario. I notice that you are late stage in a deal with conversation intelligence. I think that the key language here is, correct me if I'm wrong, and it seems like, because you don't want to trigger your prospect negatively. You don't want to say like, I heard this thing and I know you're doing it. So you always, if you're making some kind of fact about something that you don't know, I would always preface with correct me if I'm wrong. If you say correct me if I'm wrong, again, I say do not push this button, all of a sudden you want to. I say push this button, all of a sudden you don't want to. And so you want to say correct me if I'm wrong, because then your prospect innately doesn't want to. So you want to say, hope you can pardon the unsolicited intrusion. The second piece, I would give them the would have pitch. So basically here, you can read the text and you can even copy and paste this and use it, ungated in any kind of example. But in a normal world, I would have reached out about, your article on LinkedIn where you talk about scaling teams effectively, especially where you said it all comes down to conversion. And, in scale, I think is the example that I give here. I put ... and tried to give you some cheesy pitch on what if you could ensure your reps at Cloudflare were having great conversations with your prospects like you that you mentioned in this article without sacrificing scale and driving more quota attainment as a result. So basically, you want to say to your prospect, in a normal world, I would have reached out to you and done this. And you want to self-deprecate a little bit of like, I put in here the language of cheesy pitch. In a normal world, I would have been the sleazy sales rep or the cheesy sales rep who said, you wrote this article on LinkedIn, I really liked it. And you want to hook it of how you normally would have hooked it. So if you want to know how to hook it more, go to season 2, where I talk about how to hook personalization to relevance. But basically, you want to deliver what you normally would have done on a cold outreach and preface it with saying, in a normal world, I would have reached out about this article and given you some cheesy pitch on what if you could do X, Y, and Z. So that's the second step. The third step is you want to empower them through highlighting their knowledge. You want to, again, it's very, very strong to highlight where and when someone is knowledgeable, especially if you're giving them specifics. So after you go through what you normally, the would have pitch, I would say something like this. But considering I've heard you've been evaluating a CI tool for months now and probably have more knowledge, and perspective on CI at this point than me, I'll just say this. So you want to empower them that basically you don't want to placate and say like, this is my pitch. You want to say, I would have done this, but considering you probably know more about my own tool than me at this point, I'll just say this. Step number 4, you want to ask for the shot and give them a worst case scenario. So you want to go for the meeting in that fourth portion and basically give them the worst case scenario of what would happen to them if they really, really don't like it. So you'd say something like this: you give me a shot Tuesday at 2 to meet you on here, unpack a few of the specifics on goals that you want to be achieved by any kind of CI vendor, and a couple of differentiators. And I put in parentheses here, very, very important, if nothing else, to have in your back pocket. So you want to position to your prospect that the only goal is that they know who you are in case they do want some kind of competitor, they do want some kind of competitive evaluation, then they would have the information in their back pocket. And you want to make a barter with your prospect with the worst case scenario of, I promise I promise not to hammer you with follow-up if you do the most likely scenario and just stay the course with your competitor. So anytime that you tell someone some kind of outcome that is disadvantageous to you as a seller, it builds rapport with them. So if you say you do the most likely scenario and just stay with the person who's my competitor, it actually tells someone, that they can trust you because you're highlighting an outcome where you wouldn't have received the benefit. So again, you just say, give me a shot Monday at 2 to hear a few of the specifics, about your team and what you're trying to achieve. And then we can unpack a few differentiators, if nothing else, just to have them back in your pocket. And if you do that, I promise not to hammer you with the follow-up if you do the most likely case scenario and just stay with our competitor. And then number 5, the last step to any email that I typically give is the push-pull technique. So I covered this in Silver Bullet Central episode 1 on what the push-pull technique is. But basically at the end of the email, you want to give some kind of reprieve to your prospect. It takes the pressure off of if they, don't give you the meeting, don't buy your thing, then basically it's okay and you still value them. So a great example here is I say, either way, keep the good content coming. I'm a big fan of your team. Only say that if you mean it, and hope you're staying safe with everything going on in the world. So the push-pull technique is basically supposed to give some kind of reprieve to your buyer at the end. So in review, the 5 steps are, You want to set up with the scenario where you tell them, hey, I noticed that you're evaluating a CI vendor very seriously, or correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like that's happening, and I hope you can pardon the unsolicited intrusion here. Number 2, you want to go to the would have pitch. In a normal world, I would have reached out to you about this article that you wrote on LinkedIn where you talk about driving more revenue, and tried to give you some cheesy pitch on what if you could ensure all of your reps at Cloudflare were driving more revenue through having great conversations without sacrificing any kind of scale, and drive more quota attainment as a result. Step number 3 is you want to empower your prospect through highlighting their knowledge. Considering I've heard that you've been evaluating a CI tool for a couple of months now, and you probably know more about my product than I do, I'll just say this. Give me a shot Monday at 2 to meet you, hear a couple of the specifics of what you were looking to achieve through hiring on any kind of CI vendor. We can unpack a few differentiators, if nothing else, just to have in your back pocket. And if you do that, I promise not to hammer you with follow-up if you do the most likely case scenario and just stay with my competitor. Either way, keep the good content coming. I hope you and your team are doing well, and such a big fan of your team. So that's everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. If you really like this session, you want to hear more, be sure to go to flipthescript.co, and you can see a plethora of different topics that we talk about with everything sales. And if you really love this session, then go ahead and go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn and tag us and your top 2 takeaways so I know what to do to improve the future sessions. Either way, hope you have a great rest of your day.